Not every Viking story has to begin with a raid, blood, or glory. There are plenty of those stories out there. This one, it doesn't begin with a battle. It begins with a question. A girl who doesn't yet know who she is. She has no idea of her lineage, but when clues appear, when others recognize she's different, and she starts to notice that she doesn't fit in, it all sets her on a path of discovery. And what she finds isn't secret power, but something more. Unlimited potential. And figuring out her true identity is the secret that the whole entire Viking Age and what follows hinges on. Because if she doesn't figure out the mystery of her true identity, then every battle that she wins, she still loses. And every victory, it's hollow. She won't just risk her life. She's going to risk it all to get the answer she's looking for. And what comes next is the most epic adventure ever told about the Viking Age. Today is a special episode. We return to talk about Tora, get a couple glimpses into her story. Not a full chapter, but a couple snippets. Today is also a special episode for 3 more reasons. The first is, this is the 1-year anniversary of the launch of Viking Legacy and Lore. Back at the end of April of 2025, we launched this podcast with 5 episodes. You can go back, you can listen to them, download them. What an amazing year that it's been. This episode also marks our 40th episode, which is a huge milestone in the podcast world. You see, fewer than 10% of all podcasts that begin ever make it to 40 episodes. And even fewer make it to 50. But the way things have been going, the way you have helped this podcast grow, there is no reason to stop now. We're on to 50 from here. Thank you for making this podcast such a successful journey so far. The third part of what makes this episode special is the fact that this story, Tora's story, the one that you're about to hear, is part of a novel that actually inspired the podcast. The idea of her story had begun and portions written, but then it inspired a whole entire journey to venture into this podcast. And so what you're about to hear is the reason why Viking Legacy and Lore began. Because I wanted to take the stories of the North, and I wanted to take the history of the North, and I wanted to wrap it in historical fiction and present it in a way that is engaging. Not boring textbook lecture, but something that will ignite the imagination. And so that's what I hope you will get from this episode. That's what I hope you get from every episode you listen to. You get to learn something about the Viking Age, but you are also engaged in the stories. My desire is that you can feel them, you can smell them, you can taste them, you can experience what it's like to step into the Viking Age just for a moment. And then, if you learn something, you have something to tie it to in your mind, in your memory, and it's an amazing experience. I'll give you just a little bit of background on Tora's story. It takes place towards the end of the Viking Age, and it sets up a greater story that will bridge the gap between the Viking world and what came next after the infamous Battle of Stamford Bridge. It's a historical fiction story about 2 lives. So Tora is the first, and then there's one that will follow, that gives us an epic conclusion to the Viking Age and the adventures that came next for the descendants of the North. Today, we're not just telling history with the story mixed in. We're going to take a sneak peek into Tora's world, a scene early in her story where she has no idea who she is, what she's capable of, and who she would eventually become. The one thing you'll notice when you listen to Tora's story is that it's rooted in history, which means that you're not just getting a story of self-discovery, but a window into the most epic age in history. And I'll be back at the end of the episode with a special offer and a request. Here is a moment early in her story where she can sense that there is a world beyond her village. She's unfazed by the harshness that the world throws at her, and she may have, in this scene, found her first ally on her path towards an adventure and her destiny. The morning came pale and cold. The sky, a thin gray veil stretched over the valley, seemed caught between night and dawn, reluctant to allow the sun its rightful place. Tora stirred in the loft before her parents, the lingering chill of the night curling around her limbs. She pushed aside the rough wool blankets and she rose, rolling her shoulders and climbing quietly down the loft ladder. She reached for her boots, heavy, patched leather, worn smooth along the soles. She tugged them on. She laced the boots tightly, testing their grip. The memory of broken arms and bruised faces from the day before still burned fresh. The hush of the house was thick, weighed with the unspoken disapproval. All the more reason to leave it behind, if only for a short while. Outside, the breeze curled softly against her skin, the rare whisper of calm on the edge of winter, as if the world was holding its breath, waiting, watching, to see what would happen next. The last scraps of autumn scent clinging to the air. She took one breath, then another, letting the cold air fill her lungs until her heart seemed to beat in rhythm with the valley itself. Above the horizon, the sun began to peek timidly over the rolling hills. Tora watched for a heartbeat, the hush of dawn stretching between her and an unspoken future. She turned towards the docks. She made her way down the path. From a distance, she could tell that the docks were alive. The closer she drew to the sea, the sharper the smell became. Brine and rotting kelp, the tang of salt and fish guts, the faint musk of old tar and wood damp with spray. It was an odor that woke something inside of her, a longing, a restlessness, as though the ocean itself was calling her name. Ahead, the docks stretched out into the water, rough planks worn smooth by countless boats and tides. A few shipping boats bobbed in a gentle swell, their hulls battered by years of storm. Nets hanging limp and empty at their sides. She noticed a figure bent over a bundle of netting, an older man with a broad back and beard streaked with ice, muttering curses at a tangled mess of ropes. He looked up, annoyance flickering across his face as he spotted her, a girl, alone at the docks. Likely come to pry or pester. His scowl deepened. "What do you want?" he asked, voice gruff, echoing over the slap of water against the pilings. Tora paused. "Well, I want to know what's out there." The old sailor snorted, jerking the ropes free of the net, slapping it hard onto the dock. "Know what?" His lips pressed tight. "Ain't nothing out there but wind and waves, and ain't neither one gonna show you any mercy." She didn't flinch at his tone. She had grown used to the way older men in the village dismissed her, the way their eyes slid over her as though she was a stray dog sniffing at the edge of their world. "I heard that warriors had returned," Tora said, voice steady despite the sting of his rebuff. "I wanted to see how they fared." He grunted, turning his attention back to the net, his thick fingers picking up the snags. "Fared poorly from the sounds of it." A pause, then a sneer at the corner of his mouth. "Curious about war, are you?" She nodded. "I am." The man glanced at her out of the corner of his eyes, a spark of something in his gaze. Curiosity, perhaps, maybe mild surprise. He had expected her to shrink away from his brusqueness, but she remained standing, shoulders square, boots planted on the worn planks. "War is not a game, girl," he muttered. "You'll see that soon enough when you encounter those who have returned. They're not the same. War has a way of changing people, and if you don't know who you are, you're going to be lost." Tor said nothing. She let the hush stretch between them. The water lapped at the barnacle-crusted pilings below. After a moment, she took a step closer, crouched beside him, and reached for a loose strand of rope and helped untangle it. He tensed as though to protest, but he didn't stop her. She worked quietly, unafraid of splinters or the foul smell of threads and seaweed clinging to the nets. A few minutes passed in silence. Then the man let out a breath. Not quite a sigh, not quite acceptance, but something in between. "You are that girl," he said, not a question. "The one who fought with the blacksmith's boy." She nodded once, meeting his gaze without shame. He studied her for a moment, then his gruff annoyance softened into something that might have been respect. "Well, you're stronger than most and more determined, I'll give you that. Ain't many lads could take on Bjorn and his friends all at once." "I don't see why it matters that I'm not a lad," Tora said, her voice quiet yet firm. He chuckled in a low, hoarse sound. "You're not wrong." And a moment passed, the nets finally unknotted, sliding free from the rope and the ragged coil. He patted it as though it were a well-behaved dog, and he stood up straight, tall as he could, a man worn from years on the dock and decades at sea. "There's one of your warriors now." He nodded towards the longship. A man had been hauling cargo off of the boat. Tor rose, following his gaze to the shore, where a longship had been pulled up onto the beach. Sails lowered, the hull was battered. The prow, once a proudly carved dragon head, appeared splintered, waterlogged, and as though some great beast had taken a bite out of it. The man moved sluggishly across the deck, dragging a tattered sail and tossing broken shields to the beach. She left the old man behind without a word. She walked to the edge of the dock, her boots thudding against the warped planks. The sight clawed at Tora's insides, her imagination. She imagined the men fighting, the longship approaching the battle, of songs, of chests of silver in victory. Instead, she saw a man, crushed by the truth of war, a grizzled warrior unloading the remnants of a trip that didn't yield as much as they had hoped. He didn't have silver, he didn't have spoils, just hollowness and defeat. She swallowed hard, and weight pressed in her chest. She wanted to speak, to ask about the battle, about the land that they had seen, the shores beyond Norway, the storm that they had encountered, but the answer was written in the slump of his shoulders. A gust of wind hit, slapping her hair across her face as if the sea itself demanded her attention. She closed her eyes, inhaling the brine and tar, letting the rawness of it settle in her lungs. She thought of the old man with his nets, the fleeting respect in his eyes, the recognition of her spirit. She thought of the blacksmith's boy, Bjorn, of all the boys who had tried to put her in her place. She thought of her parents who wanted her to be small and not to break the world's unspoken rules. Her thoughts drifted to the horizon where the ocean stretched beyond sight. Past these waters lay kingdoms that she had heard of in rumors, lands of kings and queens, of warlords who carved empires from blood and iron, places of trade and wealth and ships that overflowed with gold and silver, a place where a girl like her might learn to fight, not out of shame, but out of purpose. She was tired of watching the men on the docks moan and mutter, haunted by ghosts of battles lost, of ventures never taken. But Tora, she felt a hunger in her blood, a deep, relentless call. A storm was coming, not in the sky, not out on the sea, but in her bones, and it was going to drive her to discover exactly who she is. Here's another brief section where Tora encounters the old fisherman again, this time away from the docks, and a budding relationship begins to develop. He will have a major impact on Tora and the path that will see her sailing beyond the horizon, where she's going to learn about her origin and true identity. The market sighed its last breath, a slow exhale of smoke curling from dying fires. Murmured bargains struck in the dwindling light. The air was thick with the scent of brine and roasting meat, the smell of spilled ale soaking into the dirt of the well-trodden path. Shadows stretched long over the stalls, the first flicker of torchlight dancing across the last wares of the day. Tora moved through the thinning crowd, her stance unbowed, chin lifted, though whispers curled around her like echoes of misdeeds. Tora passed the linen stall, her steps steady, her face unreadable. The fishmonger's stall came into view, the man himself perched on a wooden crate, elbows braced on his knees. The same thick-knuckled hands that had wrestled with the tangling net on the docks now resting idle. Tora recognized him at once, the same man she had had a brief conversation with while she went to observe the returned warriors. His beard streaked with gray and his eyes as sharp as gulls watching the tide for prey. He had the look of a man who had fought the sea and won more times than he'd lost, who had seen storms break ships like kindling, had pulled men from the waves and seen others slip beneath them. Here on the land, he seemed no less at ease, as if the sway of the ocean still moved through his bones. As she stopped before his stall, he tossed a fat cod on the counter with a heavy slap, scales dull in the fading light, the color of weathered bronze and cold stone. "Take it," he said, voice like salt and gravel. Tora frowned. "I didn't ask for that, and certainly I don't have the coin for that prized catch." "I know." He folded his arms. "Noticed you didn't come yesterday. Thought maybe you were still licking your wounds." Her jaw tightened. "I don't have wounds to lick." "Aye," he chuckled. She hesitated before taking the fish, wrapped in a scrap of cloth, fingers slick from the oil. "Why would you give this to me?" She tilted her head. "No one else would." The fishmonger exhaled through his nose, long and slow. He wiped his hand on a rag, and corners of his lips twitching as though the question amused him. His gaze slid past her, over her shoulder, towards the dark horizon where the sea kissed the sky. "Because I learned long ago never to bet against the north wind." He tapped his finger against his temple. "I saw it in your eyes the day you came to the docks, girl. When the warriors returned and you stood there watching, not like the others, not wide-eyed with wonder or fear, but searching, like you were reading the wind itself. She looked at him intently. The fight had earned her many things, but praise had not been one of them. The man's tone held something different, not mockery, not curiosity, but certainty. She observed his face, and she found no sneer, no condescension, only something measured, something weighed. He continued, still looking beyond the horizon to a place where he spoke of, "I've seen eyes like yours before," voice distant, caught somewhere between memory and knowing. "Not here, not in this village, with its fences and fields and men too afraid to row against the tide." His sharp gaze snapped back at hers. "No, girl, your blood beats with the wind from a place far beyond these cliffs. I see it in the way you move, the way you refuse to bow, the way you fight. Your ancestors, they must have traveled to the very source of the north wind." Tora scoffed and swallowed. The weight of his words pressed heavy on her chest, though she did not know why. "I was born here. I've never set foot beyond the cliffs, beyond this fjord. And you speak of the wind as having a source? How is that?" He smirked, shaking his head. "Ah, much to learn you have. Of the wind, of the waves, and of who you are. I've seen your kind before, long ago. Not many left. You come from a place older than this village, from a line that knew the wind before it had a name. The blood in your veins has known the bite of ice, the endless night, the lands where cold itself has teeth. Your people, whoever they were, they came from where the north wind is born. That is why you don't yield. That is why you stand when others kneel. Look to the wind, learn the wind, and you will learn much about yourself." She squared her shoulders, voice light, teasing. "That's quite a tale, old man. Are you saying I was dropped here by an eagle, or perhaps sent by one of Thor's bolts of lightning?" The fishmonger chuckled. His weathered face creased in a way that softened him. He leaned forward, elbows on the stall, inspecting her. "You think you were born here? Maybe, but not made here, not shaped here. I'm saying your blood remembers, even if you don't." The words settled over her. She looked down at the table, running her finger along the smooth scales of a herring. "You shouldn't say you caught this today," she murmured. "That's been out of the water 3, maybe 4 days." The old man laughed, deep and hollow. "Sharp eyes. Good. A keen eye and a sharp mind are exactly what a young warrior needs." She tilted her head. "What else can you tell me about the wind?" The fishmonger was silent for a moment, staring past her, past the market, past the rolling hills that cradled the village. He said, "You never get stronger rowing with the wind." Tora met his gaze. The meaning lay beneath the words. Deep as the ocean's pull, strong as the tide that never relents. Her lips parted, the lesson sinking in. He was not speaking only of ships nor of storms. She nodded, tucking the knowledge away, pressing it into the marrow of her bones. The fishmonger saw it. He had given a piece of himself to her that day, and he knew she would not waste it. She took the fish as a gift, weighed it, steadying her hands, then, turning on her heel, stepped away, lighter than when she came. A few paces away, she called back over her shoulder, voice half serious, half challenging. "I'm sure you have a lot more to teach me about the wind and waves." The old man huffed, lifting his head skyward one time, a nod of acknowledgement and invitation. Then she was gone, slipping through the market with almost the dance of a deer in the summer fields, and the north wind curling at her back. This section of Tora's story happens around 1035, a very significant year across the Viking world. Canute the Great, king of Denmark, died, which leads to a major power struggle across the region. This is the same year that Magnus the Good takes power in Norway, which means Harald Hardrada is serving in the Varangian Guard in Constantinople and biding his time until he would eventually return to Norway, become co-regent with Magnus for just a short time before becoming the sole leader of Norway. Iceland at this time is thriving under the Althing and Christian rule. Viking trips to Vinland come to an end, and Greenland is led by the descendants of Eric the Red. Down south, in Normandy, William the Conqueror is roughly 8 years old, and he's on a path of destiny as well. The world is setting up for an epic conclusion to the Viking Age and a transition to life after raids and expansion. And Tora's story fits right into the middle of that. Tora's story, it starts on a coastal town in western Norway with epic adventures up and down the coast and across the North Sea to Greenland and Iceland and beyond. There's something in this story that cuts deeper than ships in the water or swords on the battlefield. Tora's not chasing adventure, she's chasing identity. And if you strip away the fjords, the long ships, the clash of steel, what's left is the same question every one of us is asking, whether we admit it or not. Who am I? Because here's the truth most people don't realize until it's too late. You don't actually build your life on goals that you set or the dreams that you chase. You build your life on your identity. And if that foundation is wrong, it doesn't matter how hard you fight. It doesn't matter how much you achieve. It doesn't matter how far you travel. Tora stands at the beginning of that tension. She sees the cost. She feels the pull. She knows the world expects her to stay small, but she can sense that she was made for more. That feeling in her refused to die, and she takes the first step. And that's the moment that everything changes. That's the moment things change for all of us, when we take the first step. Because identity isn't discovered in comfort or by staying put. It's revealed in taking the first step, and then the second, experiencing the pressure, the failure, and getting up and trying again. Life is forged in moments where the easier path is to not try, to play it safe, but you don't get stronger rowing with the wind. That's true for Tora, and that's true for all of us. And realize that the wind that sometimes feels like it's against us, it's not the enemy. It's making us stronger. So the question isn't just, what will Tora become? The question is, how will we see ourselves in her story, and what can we learn from her path and her adventures and life lessons? Because whether you realize it or not, there's a storm coming, and our identity will either reveal that we're anchored or we're being tossed about wherever the current moves. If Tora's story is stirring something in you, if you're excited to hear how things unfold, then send a quick note to vikinglegacyandlore@gmail.com, just to say that you're ready. You're ready for the next phase. You're ready for the next chapter. Your support and your comments are the wind in the sails to see this project cross a vast ocean to its ultimate destiny. And if you send an email, I'll send you the complete portion of what you heard today in this episode. 2 sections of the book. Not perfect, not polished, but you'll be the first to read them in their entire context. That's a gift for you. If you so desire, send that email. If this is the first episode that you're listening to, thank you. If this is the second or third or 40th episode that you've listened to, thank you. And if this podcast has meant something to you over the past year, leave a review. Not for me, but do it so that people can find their way to this story. And to a Viking Age settlement that we're building here together, where people can warm themselves together as a community of those that love the Viking Age and the history and the lessons and the path that it sets us on. And know this, Tora will return. But realize something, she's already appeared in a past episode. Unnamed, but she was there with her friends. And she'll appear in other episodes when the story fits. The stories in these podcasts, they are more than saga-like illustrations. Many of them are part of her world. And the characters that we encounter in these episodes, they are people that she's directly connected to or crosses paths with in her story. So pay attention when you hear the stories in each and every episode, and you'll begin to see how they all connect back to her adventure. Until next time, be bold, be strong, and awaken the Viking in you.